Welcome to the Whole Athlete Podcast, where we focus on discussing topics to help you become a fat burner, optimize health, and improve performance in life and sports. Transform the whole you from the inside out with the holistic method. Let's dive in. Here's your host, Debbie Potts.
Hey everybody, I am so excited to finally have this podcast to share with you today with Dan Plews from New Zealand, and he is an amazing triathlete. He's very metabolically efficient, low-carb athlete that I got in touch with via the founders of S-Fuel, a low-carb drink supplement that I absolutely love, and it tastes really good, and they were in Ironman, Hawaii. So I wanted to share a little information about Dan before we get started. This topic, metabolically efficient athletes, is a big focus of this podcast and a passion of my own since I started doing triathlons, before 2000, Ironman distance triathlons in 2001, and I got into metabolic efficiency testing as a trainer and then as an athlete about 2005. And then when I did USA Triathlon certification course with Bob Seebohar, is one of the speakers there, and discussed the need or not the need to do gels and Cliff Bars and all that extra carb or hydrate loading when we train and race. And that was back in, 2009. So ever since then, ever since about 2005, I started being more aware of the need to do less carbohydrates, less fuel, and train the body to burn fat for endurance sports. So over time, I co-hosted the Fit Fat Fast podcast starting back, 2011 with John Smith. And then over time, this has evolved to my own podcast, The Whole Athlete, where I'm training and coaching athletes of all levels to become a fat burner rather than a sugar burner, which a lot of people are, and optimize our health at a cellular level. So metabolic efficiency, but also mitochondria health. And then in the end result, working on improving performance, not just for the sport that we are doing now, but looking ahead into our future, our performance in life. So to me, longevity is something we need to be more focused on rather than our race schedule this year. But let's make sure we're training appropriately, that we are not doing any long-term damage at a cellular level the way we train at this long distance, and the time we put on our body and the intensity, making sure we are not the typical overtrained and under-recovered athlete. So metabolically efficient athlete should be burning fat for fuel and getting off the blood sugar roller coaster. So I will add my blog, and I'm working on a little ebook for you to go over those key words. What does metabolically efficiency mean? What is metabolic flexibility? And how can you become more of a fat burning machine? If you read my book, hopefully you have, on Amazon, look up Debbie Potts and find the book called Life is Not a Race, because I go back in my own history, lifetime, and figure out when did I start to become curious about all these carbohydrates and performance, and having a banana, orange juice, and bagel before I work out, and I would just bonk, and trying to eat so much during a race, I'd be throwing it up. So if you read my book, you'll learn a lot. If you're an athlete, type A overachiever as myself, you'll probably relate to it. Maybe it's not a book for everyone, but hopefully people can relate to our addiction to busyness and doing too much. But throughout that journey that I shared in my book, I talked about how important it is to shift to a fat burner, because that is a lot of stress we put on our body. So if we're being sugar burner. So Dr. Dan Plews, he is a sports scientist, and he's got lots of education, even though he's a young guy. He's an amazing athlete. He's worked closely with athletes who have won more than 25 world and Olympic titles in sports of rowing, kayak, and triathlon. He's a researcher as well, and he's completed his PhD in the area of applied heart rate variability, one of my other favorite topics. This work focused on implementing and validating methods regarding the application of HRV to track training adaptation in elite athletes. So for sure, Dan and I are going to record another podcast on this topic because this is a huge one for those that have adrenal issues, HPA axis dysregulation, and stress, which is most all of you, that we need to track our HRV. So since then, Dan has gone on to having more than 21 peer-reviewed publications in the area of applied sports science. Dan is seriously passionate about endurance sport, especially the Ironman distance triathlon, where he's coached 3 athletes under the 8-hour barrier. He lives and breathes it. He is a competitive Ironman athlete himself, and I saw him at Ironman Hawaii and Kona in 2018 as he himself broke the amateur course record at the Ironman World Championship in Hawaii, Kona, doing a time of 8 hours and 24 minutes. Dan won the overall amateur division by more than 10 minutes and placing 22nd overall. This is Ironman Hawaii World Championship, so he is amazing. Dan thrives on continuous learning and being on the cutting edge of applied sports science. He often throws himself into the depths of a new science, measurements, and self-quantification to find out firsthand the effects that they have on training adaptation. So I'm very excited to share this podcast with you, and definitely read the show notes because I put all these other links that he sent me here. He's doing a course, an all-around low-carb long-distance triathlon course, the A to Z of how to apply low-carb, high-fat methods to training and racing, and also my Go Coach program that he has is some free information, webinars, videos in conjunction with S Fuels. He works at a university and is a physiologist by trade, so he has access to all of this equipment because I was asking him what his own metabolic efficiency results are and if he tracks or tests himself so he can track his progress and if he uses that information to implement it into his training and racing program. So he did tell me he uses Metabolic cart to assess his training zones and also fat max and metabolic flexibility information. So I love this information. Too bad I'm not in New Zealand to kind of go play with all of his testing equipment, Metabolic cart. But he's definitely in the know of what's coming up next because he's a young guy in the midst of it all, and he's really one of those that is practicing what he preaches. So let's bring on Dr. Dan Plews. He is, again, the current age group Ironman World Champion, overall group course record holder in Hawaii at an 8-hour, 24, 36 seconds. He holds age group record in another race course to Pau, I think that's Taiwan. And his key factor in his performance is training and nutrition combinations. Metabolic flexibility is his saying is train low, race high, low carb, healthy fat nutrition methods. So let's hear what he has to say. And I can't wait to talk to him again about heart rate variability training and the low carb athlete. Here we go. Let's listen to what he has to say.
So thanks for having me on, Debbie. It's great to be here. I'm Dan Plews. So I have a background in exercise physiology. I have a PhD in exercise physiology. My PhD was actually in the area of heart rate variability, so a little bit far away from the topic that we're discussing right now. But I'm also an avid Ironman triathlete myself, so I've done quite a lot in the Ironman space, both as an athlete and as a coach and physiologist. But I guess what I'm kind of a bit more renowned for at the moment is my low carb lifestyle and the performances I've had based using the low carb lifestyle. So yeah, that's kind of a very quick background on me.
Well, you're well known for Ironman 2018 because Ironman Hawaii. Talk about what happened there.
Yeah, so 2018, I was competed at Kona, and I won the age group race overall, and I broke the age group course record as well, 8 hours and 24 minutes. So I think I was 7 or 8 minutes faster than anyone's gone before as an age grouper. So that's kind of and that's got me, I guess, a little bit more attention than what I've had previously from my academics or any other performances I've had. So yeah, it's been really cool, especially with the knowledge that people know I'm definitely a low carber, and it really opens up a lot of queries from many people asking about how I kind of go about my day-to-day living.
Well, I started this podcast. I co-hosted it called Fit, Fat, Fast back in 2011, where we talked all about the low carb athlete, metabolic efficiency, and eating more fat, lower carb. I personally started doing Ironmans in 2001 and started doing more the Maffetone heart rate and low carb. About 2005, started realizing, this high carb sugar intake every hour wasn't working for me, and I'd be throwing up the whole bike ride, and then figured out after Bob Seebohor's USA Triathlon Coaching Seminar, I think it was 2009, because I just did a podcast by myself on this in a blog, that he made total sense to me, and I figured this out on my own. But having all these gels and bars every hour and having this drink mix with 300 to 500 calories in it and trying to consume all this stuff every hour just didn't work, and it didn't make sense for me. So how did you become a low carb athlete yourself?
Yeah, yes, I mean, it was funny when you say it didn't work. I mean, and the good thing about it, and I think just on that topic, the area of, I'm an exercise physiologist, and in biology and physiology, it's not like physics, right? So like in physics, a physicist will tell a biologist that they're not doing a real science because it's not predictive. So a physicist will do the same thing every single time and get the same result. Whereas in biology, it's a little bit different. But I think with the low carb stuff, we can at least model like oxidation of carbohydrates and fats, and we actually know, it doesn't make sense and it does actually work. So it's really cool. But to answer the question on how I became a low carb athlete, so my journey started in 2012, and at the time I was actually at the London Olympics with the New Zealand rowing team, and it was at the time when Tim Noakes first started kind of talking a lot about the low carb diet, and Tim Noakes is always a scientist who I've had a whole lot of respect for, real pioneer and real. Is really challenging beliefs and pushing our theories on what we think we know. And usually when he stands up and says something, I'll pay attention. So I thought, what's all this about? And I kind of did a little bit of research and was thinking, maybe this has got some legs. And at the same time, I knew that my buddy, Professor Paul Lawson, was also delving into it. And he was saying how good he was feeling and it was amazing, but he was kind of more paleo at that point rather than low carb. But I mean, that's still, people go paleo, it's still a big reduction in the carbohydrates generally. So I started to experiment then, and I can assure you that when you're at the Olympics, it's not that easy to go low carb. There's a lot of carbohydrate around the Olympics. So that's when my journey started. And I guess a lot of tweaking along the way with various levels of carbohydrates, from quite strict keto to more low carb, to really thinking I was low carb when I actually really wasn't low carb. I kind of found my sweet spot, I guess, and kept building in my performances over Ironman. Just got better and better and better. And 2012, I did my first ever 2013, I did my first ever Ironman. Early stages of what I thought was low carb, but I really wasn't doing it right. I was kind of a bit cheaty and not really nailed with everything completely correctly. And from through self experimentation, getting it right slowly but surely, I found the perfect mix up.
So how do you describe metabolic efficiency, metabolic flexibility, and being fat adapted?
So I mean, metabolic flexibility is it's basically the term that I like to use is that it's the ability to use fats only when you really need to. So sorry, they use carbohydrates only when you really need to. Yeah,
I thought
so
that was backwards.
yeah. So the ability to use carbohydrates only when you really need to. So in that idea, so say two people will go off on a bike ride. The more metabolically flexible person will just start burning fat stores straight away, and it'll take quite a lot of intensity before they cross that barrier and start burning predominantly more carbohydrates than fats. Whereas the non-fat adapted athlete, so someone who's metabolically inflexible, will burn mostly glucose at rest, and then when they exercise, they'll pretty much cross over and burn mostly glucose immediately. So that's what metabolic flexibility is. It's the ability to use carbohydrates and preserve them as much as you can.
Now,
use fat as the opposite fuel.
And I think that's, if anyone stops and thinks about why, when we're doing a long distance event, and I know Bob Seebohor in his book, Volk Finney, they explain this really well too, is that, you have so many calories stored as fat, and then we have a little bit of calories stored in muscle glycogen. And if we're going for 2, 3, 4 hours, what fuel source should we be tapping into? But if you eat carbs, you're going to keep burning carbohydrates and get that blood sugar roller coaster and have to keep eating gels and bars and drinks every hour, right? So it's just so interesting how so many people are still on that high carb bandwagon. So it's great that your experience last year really brought attention to the low carb athlete and being more metabolically efficient.
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of one. I did the Ironman, and I trained hard, and I did it more because it was kind of my own personal journey and my goal. But it's quite nice to actually have brought this to people's attention a little bit more, because there's a lot of naysayers out there, and people really couldn't believe it because we've been so brainwashed by the Gatorades and the all
sponsors of everything.
Sponsors of these events that actually really make us believe that you can't do anything without carbohydrates. And it's absolute, it really is hogwash. And I'm sure, as we'll get into, not only do you not need it for performance, but regardless of that, you can argue that, okay, you need carbohydrates for performance, whatever, but you cannot argue that it's good for your health, and the continuous destruction of having high sugar during training for the endurance athlete, having sugar all the time, gels during, drinks during, feeding with some sugary recovery drink or whatever after, is really not that great for your overall health and well-being as well.
Yeah. And, it's funny because I do coaching myself and started doing more online coaching and teaching people what I call the holistic method to train the whole athlete from the inside out for longevity and performance. So it's not just that Ironman you're doing this year or 50K trail run, but let's look at ahead, the future, and what we're doing now impacts our health at a cellular level. That I think, it's so funny just helping people in 1 month, how they have this huge transformation from just shifting them from eating the gel blocks and having the drink mix and teaching them heart rate, how they train. So what have you found that you did yourself training, if it was exercise and nutrition, becoming more metabolically efficient, maybe some other areas that helped you become a fat burner versus a sugar burner?
Yeah, so I guess I think I've always been pretty good with my training methodologies. Like, I didn't really change. I mean, the math method of training, it's just training below your first ventilatory threshold or your aerobic threshold. That's all he's trying to promote, and that's quite a well-known model for improving your endurance. Is not training in that mystery zone, doing your easy things easy and your hard things hard. And I've written a few blog posts on the difference between polarized and pyramidal training. Mm-hmm. But I guess the main thing was changing my diet, not believing that carbohydrates were essential for recovery as well. And there's, if you look at all of the research now, in fact, it's the complete opposite. Like, carbohydrates are actually worse for your recovery. And the fact that ketones are present, you don't need glucose to take protein into the muscle, for example, which is a common belief, whereas ketones, which is a fuel derived from fat, can help actually increase the uptake of proteins in the muscle. So there's a whole cascade of events that helps not just the metabolic side, but also the recovery. But But I guess one of the real things that I think pushed was the change in diet, but also what I ate during training, and how much I would push not eating and fasted training to really push that fat oxidation at the same time. Because it's one thing adopting a diet to become metabolically flexible, but you can get fivefold the results if you incorporate it into the right type of training sessions at the right times.
So I was going to ask that next. The fasting is really big in just general health right now, intermittent fasting, 24, 72 hours, whatnot. Yep. But for athletes, for myself, I've done this for years, doing the low carb food plan, and just, I feel better not eating before I work out. So I think you have to become fat adapted before you just jump into that side of training and fueling. But how do you feel about the whole intermittent fasting as an athlete, and fasting and getting into ketosis, and talk a little bit about your philosophy on that side of things?
Yeah, so it's funny. So one of my colleagues with my business, Endure IQ, is Professor Grant Schofield, who's just written a book called What the Fast. And it's all about this intermittent fasting area. So it's, basically it's so his method is that you fast on Monday and Tuesday. So you just have your evening meals, and then you go on, and then you go on it. It's supposed to like cleanse the cell. So if you think about what's happening when it comes to fasting, so what we're promoting is something called autophagy, which is basically it's cleansing of the cell. So the way I like to think of it is that if we consider that our engines are like a steam train, and we've got the steam, we've got the fire going in the steam train, and we're throwing in the logs to keep the fire burning, eventually those logs are going to run out, right? So what we'll do is then we can walk down the carriages, and we'll pick up all the debris, any leftover wood that might be lying in the carriages, throw it in the fire and burn that up too. So it's essentially cleansing the cells. So that's what fasting is about in a nutshell, and that's where the health benefits come from. But as an athlete, you think about how fast your fire is burning if you are going on a long fasted ride, or you're doing things where you're in a bit of energy deficit as well. So athletes will get a lot of the benefits from fat. You don't have to fast from the morning till 12. If you got up in the morning, had a black coffee, and did a 2-hour or 2.5-hour training session, you'll probably be in the same position as a person who's not exercising and has been to around the 12, not eating until 12 or 3 or 1 o'clock. So I think the benefits of fasting are great. It does, and if you look at the research, not eating before and not eating during exercise does increase your fat oxidation. So that's another benefit. But I also will say that with a caveat to that, I think we also have to be, as athletes, we have to be really careful to not have any kind of fatigue associated with negative energy balance. That everyone knows about the female athlete triad, where women, athletes or female athletes, they don't eat enough, and they lose too much weight, they're in negative energy balance and become anamorphic. But it's also a massive problem in male athletes as well. And I think that's often really overlooked. Is that there's a study that was brought out last year that showed that if a male athlete is more than 400 calories in deficit per day, you're under serious risk of reducing your testosterone production, and then serious risk of having bone density issues as well. So I think that's why you do have to. It's not. I think doing too much of it can be detrimental. And on that, and just to finish on that, I know that a lot of athletes find that when they do too much fasted training, their sleep also goes down, because you're just a little bit too catabolic at that point. So I think it's beneficial at times, but I think also it comes with the caveat that you have to be, everything in moderation, as they say.
Yeah. I'm laughing because I wrote my book, Life is Not a Race, my story that happened when you started your career. 2012 is kind of the end of my career for the time being. And I wrote in my book, Life is Not a Race, about my metabolic efficiency training and how I always kind of switched that low carb, high fat lifestyle. And I was doing my fat coffee in the morning, going fast. I could do all this stuff. But then I think I got too serious, as most of us type A personalities take it a little too far, and all the training and lifestyle habits of being busy. And so I say living life as a race, as well as training all the time and racing a lot, that I feel like I did it too much, because then you're not eating enough. And I think there's always that fine line of how much fasting or, how low carb should you go, and when is it causing another source of stress, or are you going to break down muscle and create more fatigue in your body as well?
Yeah. Yeah. And there you go. So you've discovered it firsthand. So you've got more experience than anyone.
Now I'm helping other people to avoid going through what I did.
Yeah. And that's awesome. And even ketosis by itself, right? We're not, as human beings, we're not designed to be in ketosis for prolonged periods of time, right? We're supposed to be in and out of ketosis. And I think I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about ketosis. But I always have trouble with the term itself, like this term ketogenic diet, because to me, ketosis is not a diet. It is a physiological state. So we often often I work for, I do some work with the company S Fuels, and I'm sure we're going to talk a bit more about them later. And we often get the question, we go, "Are your bars ketogenic?" And I think, well, yeah, if that's all you're going to eat in the day, there's 20 grams of carbs in there, but if you have that with an apple and a banana, no, it's not. So, so it's kind of like this kind of thing that's a bit of a misunderstood area. And as athletes, we have exercise-induced ketosis as well. So we'll always be coming in and out of ketosis, which is where you want to be. But if you're permanently refueling with sugar, you would never achieve that state.
So that's an area I keep kind of wanting to learn more about, and just self-experimenting, figuring out on my own, is that, you're being fat adapted, or, is that ketosis? And everyone is such a big buzzword right now, ketosis. Yeah. But for athletes, as you're saying, if we're training for long training rides and I'm burning fat, I can go fasted. I feel, I can work out and do a fasting day and not eat till 4:00 in the afternoon after I did couple workouts in my day. That I'm fat adapted, but do I say I'm in ketosis? And what's the difference if it's you're fat adapted, your byproduct of metabolizing fat are some ketones, but is that when you say I'm in ketosis or not?
Yeah, and most people have no clue if they're in ketosis or not anyway, right? So they just think they are. By definition, if you look at Volek and Finney's, their definition is anything above 0.5, you're in ketosis, but other people will say anything above 0.3. So yeah, it's a bit of a gray area. But if you've done a ride in the morning, you are, even if it's exercise induced ketosis, if your ketones in your blood are high enough, you are by definition in ketosis. But the thing that most people will find, and I think lots of the athletes that I work with, they get really frustrated with this. With when they first start becoming fat adapted, I always encourage them to take their blood ketones in the morning. In the first week or so, ketones are really high. But then during as they become more and more fat adapted, and they, glucose, so their ability to find other sources of carbs from whether breaking down a protein or breaking down triglycerides, it improves. Their ketones don't go up as high anymore, and they find it really difficult to get into ketosis. So for someone like me, I've been doing this for so long, for me to be in ketosis, I would have to be so low on my carbohydrates. We're talking 25 grams, which is pretty much it. I just can't do it, but I can do it quite easily if I do a fasted ride. So I come back from a fasted long ride and I've just had fat as a fuel. I'll come back and my ketones will be 1.5 or 1.5 to 2. So this is, but many people, what they find when they first start, they'll do a fasted rise, they'll come back, their glucose will be at 3.1, the ketones will be at 0.2, and they'll be rolling on the floor in a state.
Yeah. Well, that's why I think it gets confusing, because I might not show I'm, 1 to 3 on my ketone meter if I'm going to test, but I'm not burning sugar. I'm burning mostly fat. So you're still burning fat, but maybe not a ton of ketones.
Exactly, because there's different mechanisms at play. So you've got the burning of ketones, and you've got the burning of fat in the form of palmitate from what we call beta oxidation. So from beta oxidation, you're burning fat. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're building up the ketones, especially if you've been doing it for a while. If you look at, remember, there's a study that was done by Volek and Finney, another one, the faster study that I'm sure you're aware of, that they showed that one of the real key points in that study was that the muscle glycogen content in the fat adapted athletes and the non-fat adapted athletes, so the high carb versus the low carb athletes at the start of exercise was identical, even though the fat adapted athletes have had no carbohydrates and not even been eating any. So, that's like, if you've got kind of that reductionist mentality, you'll be thinking, how is that even possible? But this is the thing that as humans, we don't need carbohydrates to live, and because we're so efficient at building carbohydrates from other sources, from proteins and the breaking downs of triglycerides. So so that's where it kind of gets a bit murky with the difference between low carb ketogenic lifestyles.
Yeah, I find it just so much information out there. Like, what's the main benefit? What are the purpose? And I think it's performance, but then the long term, we want good longevity. So the fasting, I've really been interested in learning more of the cell autophagy, which I'll have to look that book up, because that's why I was reading some books, and YouTube has everything. Lots of videos on cell autophagy.
But unfortunately, not all YouTube sources can be trusted.
No, there's some bad ones, but there's some interesting ones, and everyone's a doctor, they're chiropractors. So you had to look at if the information is right or not. But just the whole fasting and cell health, I think, in mitochondria health is really something we should look at for endurance athletes, because as I went through and shared in my book, that the chronic stress is such an epidemic. So I think everyone's doing this, trying more low carb, or maybe they're starting to shift to be more fat adapted. But what I coach people on the holistic method is you still need to address the sleep, the stress, the movement, mobility drills, and digestion, gut health, their microbiome, and hydration is so key, and the electrolytes and minerals. And then the last one, as you were saying earlier on your website too, is mine's happiness, gratitude, joy, laughter, play. And all these 8 elements that I call the holistic method all influence one another. So if one's out, they all kind of are impacted. So I think, becoming fat adapted and metabolically efficient, we need to still look at the other elements of like the holistic method that you're looking at, not just going low carb, high fat, and training more maybe aerobically and build up that aerobic engine. But I think so many people don't sleep, and they're stressed all the time, and they're just trying to put more activities in the daytime. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So let's get into your fueling, your day plan, and talk about a product that I found out about at Ironman Hawaii last year, S Fuels. So what's your daily routine? Like if you're training, let's kind of start with that and then talk about the product that I like.
I'll just think of a general day. So say if I'm starting my day with, on a Thursday, my typical day would start with a high intensity bike session, followed by kind of a run off. So that session might be like 3 times 5 minutes, 3 times 4 minutes, and then 3 times 3 minutes at like quite high intensity. So for me, that would be around 380 to 400 watts. And then after that, I'd get off and I'd run 8K on the treadmill, and it would be around 340K pace. So somewhere between 70.3 and my Ironman pace. So what I would do before that session is I'd wake up and I'd have a coffee, and in that coffee I'd have collagen, MCT, and cream. So MCT is a medium chain triglyceride for people who are wondering what that is, and that's basically it's a fat that's really easily used as fuel and easily converted into ketones. So if you find people who have MCTs, generally will have better ketone production as well, and also an S Fuels bar. So the S Fuels bar it's got a little bit of carb in, and it's basically whey protein isolate, collagen, nuts, lots of fats, but really mostly health. It's kind of more of a natural food. So as a result, the shelf life is very low. So it's not getting what we call any of these nasties in there. So that's what I would have before, and that'll give me a bit of a kick before I start that kind of session. And during that session, I would just have the S Fuels. So S Fuels have an ultra drink as well, which is purely a fat-based drink. So within that drink, that's made up of MCT, bound to collagen, glutamine, potassium, and sodium. So there's 0 carbohydrates in there. It's just pure fat. And it's more because the main reason I have that is just to keep up my energy availability more than to fuel the session. Even in a high training load, I find that if I don't have something some calories during, I'll just drop weight a little bit too quickly, and I can be in that negative calorie deficit. So that would be the training session, and I get off, and I would just generally have some sort of what I generally have, and my wife thinks it's disgusting, is I have like eggs, broccoli, and sardines. It's kind of my go-to morning meal, and that would leave me satiated for a very long time, and maybe a few snacks during the day, some nuts or some almonds, and then get through to dinner, and that would generally be a protein and a salad, and then that's kind of my day really, and then I'll be ready to. Maybe I might do some recovery stuff in the evening and then ready to kickstart the next day.
So you don't do intermittent fasting, like a 16-hour overnight?
No, I haven't. I don't. Not when I'm training. No, I do it if I take my foot off the gas and I'm not training very much, or I'm not training at all, or say I'm traveling and I can't train. I'll try and do a bit more intermittent fasting. Yeah, I mean now I'm not. Now after Kona, I'm not training as much, so I'm kind of doing it a little bit more. But yeah, because training for Kona, I was training 21 hours a week, right? And it's just, I did 21 hours. I wrote a blog on it, and I trained 21 hours a week for 28 weeks. So that was my average for 28 weeks. So when you're at that kind of, and it was a lot of quality in there. Mm-hmm. But when you're training at that kind of level, you just can't afford to miss calories, and so that was, so I never really did that, no.
Yeah. So are you avoiding, for training wise intensity, do you do kind of avoid the black hole and do high intervals as you're just talking about, and then the other ones are low heart rate? So if you go for a long run, or do you do more intervals?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a mixture. So it depends on the phase of training. So when I'm kind of further away from competition, it would definitely be a bit more polarized, where I'm either really high or really low. Because I believe that the trick to a good training program is that you start off unspecific, and as you get towards the race, your training becomes more specific. And unfortunately, if you're training for 70.3 or Ironman, you're in that 70.3 is bang smack in the middle of the zone, right? So if you're doing 70.3, it's in that mystery zone. It's between anaerobic threshold. So if you're training for a 70.3 and you're doing race specific work, you are by default in the right smack bang in the middle. So it is unavoidable to some extent. But in my 28 weeks training to Kona, I think I had 77% of my training was in below MAF. So that gives you an idea of most of my training is aerobic. So yeah, and then a little bit of high intensity, and then some. Even when I do Ironman pace, my heart rate would still be pretty much aerobic. So,
have you ever done genetic testing, 23andMe? And I just used DNA Fit, did their coaching program, but it's interesting to me to know how I train and race and what works for me, and working with clients, and everyone's individual, how the genetics can use that information to personalize a nutrition exercise program.
No, I've never used it. No.
It's kind of cool. I just did a podcast about that, how you can take your 23andMe results, raw data, and upload it into DNA Fit. And that's going to give you more your personalized nutrition exercise genetics. And then there's Strategene, and Dr. Ben Lynch has his is Strategene. Then there's a couple different ones that you can add on and find a little more detailed about detoxification, methylation cycles. And so it's kind of fun to dive into that. I've been doing that last few months, learning about that a little more. So it's kind of fun to put it all together.
No, sounds interesting. No, never done it. I'd be interested to see what the results come back, but so I've never done it.
Well, next subject, and I know we're running out of time, and I have a client to get to later, but I would love to talk about S-Fuels, because I just got back from amazing training week in Tucson and took the S-Fuels drink mix with me, and just did pretty much, just coffee in the morning and some nuts, and went for 50 to 70 mile bike rides every day for 6 days. And I found it so easy. I usually don't like a lot of drink mixes because they have too much sugar in them, and I just rather have water and sea salt in my drinks. But going for a longer ride, it was warmer out, it's 80 degrees. I found it interesting. It's so light and almost like electrolyte tasting. So what is S Fuels and the ingredients, and why, if you're familiar with it, why there's glutamine and what the ingredients are for?
Okay, cool. So the S Fuels, so you're talking about the ultra drink here, right? So
I think so.
The I think I mentioned very briefly. So the S Fuels Ultra drink is basically, it's mostly made up of so it's MCT and it's bound to collagen. So a lot of other products out there, the really cool thing about S Fuels is that we've bound it to collagen. So it really does minimize any spike or any sugar spike. Whereas a lot of the other so-called like fat burning drinks, the MCT or coconut, they use coconut oil and they're bound to a maltodextrin, which kind of defeats the purpose, right?
Yeah.
So that's where, we really try to go for this that is a pure low carb option. It really has no sugar spikes and it has no carbohydrates in there. And it means that you're basically, in terms of blood sugar, your sugar and an insulin is stable all the way through exercise. So all the other products that are binding maltodextrin to MCTs, it's a bit of a mockery, really. So But the reason that the glutamine, so it also has potassium and sodium, obviously they're for your normal electrolytes to keep the electrolyte balance, and a major one in that is the sodium increases the palatability, right? So it makes it taste a lot better and it increases that want to actually drink it, because keep on top of the thirst response. But then another interesting ingredient is that it also has glutamine in there. So many people, sports scientists, they'll associate glutamine. There's been a lot of research done around glutamine into immune function. So the idea that glutamine helps the immune response and it helps basically stops you getting sick. But the research in that area is a little bit sketchy. So it's kind of neither one way nor the other. But what we do know about the glutamine is that so glutamine, when you have it during exercise, it can actually support the gut. So it helps minimize what we call gut permeability and particularly the permeability of something called lipopolysaccharides. So and that's really important when you're exercising, especially when you're exercising when you're getting hot and dehydrated. So if you get that kind of leakage, it increases your systemic inflammation, which is obviously not a very good health outcome. And that's been shown. It's been shown in a number of studies. There's a study that was done. There was a study that was done by a Spanish group that I read the other day, and it was looked at basically something called TNF alpha that was a really good a cytokine that's involved in systemic circulation. And when you had glutamine, it really, compared to a maltodextrin, it really reduced the TNF alpha in the system. So that's kind of, it's more like, the motto of S Fuels is go longer. And obviously there's more to that than just going longer in your sport. It's actually going longer in your life and your longevity. So we're trying to encapsulate that into one product. So that's where the glutamine comes in. So,
I was going to add on that glutamine in nutritional therapy. That's what you usually give someone or test on them to see if it helps their gut inflammation, dysbiosis, leaky gut. So right on with what you're saying is that it's often used for helping heal gut inflammation and permeable gut, which is leaky gut. And I think majority of people have something, especially for athletes and what we've been eating for years and the stress we put on our body and digestion issues. And I think that it's great. It's very unique to me to see something as a sports drink with glutamine in it. So that's why I was curious of, what the
And just to finish up on the glutamine, another good point for the glutamine is I read this other study that was the other day that was done by an Australian group, and there's another reason that we included it in the product is that it actually helps muscular recovery. So it was given to a group of people who had like bed rest or knee operation, and the two groups, both of them had knee operations. One group had glutamine and one group didn't have glutamine, and there was a substantial holding of strength in the glutamine group compared to the non-glutamine group. So also there is some aspects of facilitating muscle recovery as well. So you can have
I must say I had that happen or something last week. We rode our bike Saturday to a Thursday. And this is end of March. So in Seattle area, I rode a little bit in January, but we had random snow in February. So I hadn't really been training, but we did just little rides on the trainer or some rides out here. And then Christmas time we rode in Palm Springs. But it's so interesting to me how training for so many years, for 20 years, that I could go ride 50, 70 miles a day. Granted, it was pretty flat and I kept my heart rate 120 to 130. I used S fuels and we actually swam a little bit and I ran 30 minutes a day and I felt amazing every day.
I mean, that's awesome, because that's not only, the S fuels and the glutamine perhaps, but also it is the fact that you eat properly and you're a fat adaptive athlete. So if you look at detraining studies, the main shift in someone who's detraining is substrate utilization. So they will shift very quickly from burning fats to burning, regardless of diet, they will shift from burning fats to burning more carbohydrates. And that's one of the earliest detraining things that happens. But with metabolic, if you're in a high fat diet and you're doing intermittent fasting, your detraining effect in terms of endurance will be much, much less pronounced. And that's what you would have experienced a lot of there. Yeah. And the really good thing, I know that I joined S Fuels, when did I join? So it was 2017, but I originally joined them as a sponsored athlete, and they, I started using their product. I was already a low carb athlete. So I was kind of just reaching out and really trying to find, something that I could actually use in training. And it's because of that very reason that if you don't eat during training, you really are running the risk of not recovering as well. But you don't want to have sugars at the same time, because that affects your recovery. So we've got this perfect, that we believe are designed to have this perfect product for a low carb athlete that can give you that longevity in your life, that longevity in your training. So the recoverability increases, you keep on going without any unwanted or unneeded fatigue, and also the longevity in the event itself. So it's pretty cool.
Well, that's what I am also changing to coach and help the podcast teach aging athletes, because I'm suddenly, I think I'm 35, but I'm not anymore. So as I get older, you still want to do this stuff. And I keep saying, you want to train and race, if you can race for a long term, that we're not doing damage to our bodies. And I think it's so important to train the whole athlete from the inside out, as we talk about, that it's really important, not just hammering your body and having the rest of your life you're suffering.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And there's so many things you can do. I think I've said before, I think I've said in another podcast that I do believe that if you want to be a really good Ironman athlete, if you want to be going 8:24 or whatever in Kona or winning your age group, there are certain damages that have to be undertaken. But I think the trick is that you have to minimize them as best as you can. And if you don't pay any attention to these things that we're talking about now, you're just going to be so sympathetic, so inflamed, and it's just not going to, you're just not going to enjoy the training and the competing like you should. And I can tell you now that my build up to Kona in 2018, I love the process. I love training. And I really, now I'm not training as much and I really miss it. But I guess it's a kind of a choice that I'm just doing a bit more, concentrating on a bit more business and stuff. You can't do everything, right? But it doesn't mean that I'm still up at, every morning, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, I'm up at 4:45 because I wanted to get some training in before I start work. So,
well, that's how you wake up, right? And, I did Ironmans for years and I haven't raced since Hawaii Ironman 2012. And I still swim masters 3 days a week. I'm not so serious, I don't care if I get in 10 minutes late or whatnot. And I still run and I bike and I follow my schedule that I have just because it's what I love to do and it's my routine. And that's what I start my day this way. And this is my lunchtime. I like to wake up and.
Yeah, exactly. But the good thing is you don't feel the pressure of having to do it, which is kind of nice in a way.
I know. I thought about racing Ironman Canada this year because I'm feeling better finally after 5 years. And I'm like, it's kind of fun just training and not racing.
Yeah. It is nice for sure.
But I know we're out of time, but I'd love to redo a podcast or have you on again and talk about HPA axis and the HRV. You said earlier that you studied heart rate variability. And I am so into that as well as sympathetic dominance and teaching people.
Okay. Yeah, well, heart rate variability is kind of that's my main area. Well, yeah, I guess it's my main area. It's the area that I did my PhD in. So
Okay, I did not know. And that's what we're recording next week, a podcast on heart rate variability. We've done a lot of that in the past, and I've
got 20. I think I've got 20 publications in HRV now. So.
Wow, so you're the expert. So
I've done a little bit in the area, yeah.
Okay, so are you wearing an Oura ring?
Not right now, but I do wear it when I go to sleep. So I have a close relationship with Marco Altini from HRV for Training. And we're just I was just messaging him this morning because we're having a bit of back and forth about he's just linked the Oura ring to HRV for Training.
Finally, I've been trying to get Training Peaks to do that because people are coaching with Oura ring. You got to have it synced all together. Yeah,
but that will be the thing. Once it's linked to HRV for Training will sync to Training Peaks. But you wouldn't need it because Marco uses a lot of the analysis that I uncovered during my PhD for measuring the response to training. So you wouldn't, Training Peaks on its own, it's just a number. It doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
In Marco's HRV for Training Pro app or Pro desktop, he has a lot of the kind of the bands for substantial increases and decreases in individual variation of HRV. So I use it all the time with my athletes. I have a number of jobs. I work for the Women's Kayak New Zealand Women's Kayak Olympic program. I also am the head of performance for Emirates Team New Zealand America's Cup team. So with those guys, we have what we call a wellness window. And, I have it all on using Marco's app. I'll just pop it up in the morning and I just see immediately exactly where all the sailors are. And I can just make
all right, I gotta use that. I've not looked at that before.
Yeah, there you go.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I was going to add, I was at the Expo West. It's called the Natural Product Show in Anaheim a few weeks ago. And there's a ton of people from Australia and New Zealand. And there's a ton of products that are low carb because I was researching low carb food for athletes. And a lot of keto, low carb, high fat stuff are coming from Australia and mostly the bars and the fat bomb type of fat butters. So it's interesting that how you guys are a little more on top of it than the North Americans.
Yeah. We're pretty fortunate, and I think a lot of it is led. So I work for Auckland University of Technology, and we're very fortunate that we have like real world leaders here. So Professor Grant Schofield, Dr. Karen Zinn, if you know who they are, like they're real world leaders in this area, and they've really, they've pushed quite strongly the low carb lifestyle across Australia and New Zealand. And it's really, so where I'm sat right now, I have a low carb cafe across the road. And then if I ever go out down the street and walk another 300 meters, another low carb cafe where you can buy keto sandwiches, keto breakfast muffins.
No way.
Yeah, so it's I could talk about this all day. Like it's even getting into the Maori communities as well, which is really great. And me and Prof Grant Schofield, we were down in a place called Taupo where they have the New Zealand Ironman, and they've got a program there called Reversing Type 2 Diabetes, and the GP who works in Taupo has reversed 23 cases of type 2 diabetes in Maori populations using ketogenic diets. So there's even Maori are developing their own language for keto now. So it's really, we talk about, we sit here now and we talk about sport and how it affects one person's Ironman time, but really it's just little picture stuff, right? This is the real big stuff that's going to hopefully change the world. So. Well,
that's my little pocket of athletes is through the podcast and coaching people, but my clients that I work with day to day are about longevity and health. And so I always tie that in because it's not just triathlon, isn't we need to look at the big picture, and that's the performance in life and sports and our longevity. So I'm so excited to talk to you today. I love this stuff, and I can't wait to talk more about heart rate variability and keto and all that stuff. And hope you're going to any conferences this year or speaking.
No, not at the moment. I'm no plans at the moment. No, just gonna stick. I've got. We have another little. So we've got one, a 2-year-old, nearly 2, and we've got another one on the way. And we don't know if boy or girl yet, but due in late August, early September. So we're kind of just limited traveling, I guess.
Yeah, staying over there. Well, good luck with everything. Are you doing Ironman Hawaii again? Since you've got your guaranteed spot.
No, I'm not going to do it.
Baby.
No, I'm
getting priority.
Yeah. So don't think that'll make me that popular. Honestly, leaving because I'd have to leave not long after. But I'll probably be there. I might just go doing a quick in and out. I'll be at the race because I'll have a couple of my athletes racing. So
yeah. Well, good. Well, I'll be there. So keep in touch.
Awesome. Thanks,
All
Debbie.
right. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Whole Athlete Podcast. If you have any questions, feedback, or topic suggestions, let us know on Facebook or at wholeathletepodcast.com. You can help us continue and grow by leaving a review on iTunes. Thanks again, and see you next time.